Hello, welcome. The title of this lesson is Logic Basics and Doubts About Morality. This is a lesson on the topic of moral skepticism. Moral skepticism is an attitude of doubt about morality. In my experience, many students, if not most students, in an intro to ethics class like this one, will begin the class as moral skeptics with an attitude of doubt about morality. And the ultimate goal of this lesson is to address some of those doubts here at the outset. This is a lesson in two parts. So first, we're going to learn about logic basics, and then we're going to address those doubts about morality. Because in order to think critically about moral skepticism and the arguments for moral skepticism, in order to analyze those arguments, we're going to have at least some rudimentary logical tools to work with. So I have to teach you just a little bit about the analytical method. So part one, we're going to do a crash course in logic. We're going to learn some basic points about logic. And then in part two, we're going to address doubts about morality using those logical tools. So let's get started. All right, so logic basics. This is a crash course in logic. First key idea is logic itself. Logic is the study of the principles used in reasoning. Logicians are concerned with what makes for good and bad arguments. And if you paid attention to last week's lesson, logic is the method we use in philosophy. So, where the natural sciences use the scientific method, philosophy uses logic. The object of study in logic is the argument. And so an argument is a chain of reasoning designed to prove or establish some conclusion. And again, the logician is concerned with what makes for good and bad arguments. Arguments have building blocks. Those building blocks are called propositions, or if you want, statements. And so a logical proposition is a statement or a claim that has a truth value. And so arguments are built out of propositions or statements or claims that are either true or false. Two different kinds of propositions in arguments. There are premises. Those are the statements that are intended to support or establish the conclusion. And conclusions. Those are the statements that the argument is meant to establish. This will be easiest to see if we look at an example. So let's call this example argument number one. So this is an argument. When you lay out an argument this way, there's a name for that. They call this a syllogism. This is a classic. Premise one, all men are mortal. Premise two, Socrates is a man. And therefore, conclusion three, Socrates is mortal. And so here we have a chain of reasoning designed to establish some conclusion. It has three propositions or three claims with a truth value. That is, all three of them are true. The first two claims are called premises, and they're meant to establish or prove the third claim, which is called a conclusion. These three dots here, that's a symbol that signifies a logical inference. And so what we're doing here is we're inferring three from one and two. And so premise one, all men are mortal. Premise two, Socrates is a man. And therefore, Conclusion 3, Socrates is mortal. That is, logicians might say that the conclusion can be inferred from the premises, or the conclusion follows from the premises. So far, so bad. Now, the next key idea, and this is the first difficult point, is the idea of logical validity. So, example argument number 1 is logically valid. Pay careful attention to the definition of logical validity here. What it means to say that an argument is logically valid is that assuming the truth of the premises would guarantee the truth of the conclusion. That is, that the argument is structured in such a way that the conclusion follows from the premises or can be inferred from the premises with certainty. In other words, the truth of the premises, assuming the truth of the premises guarantees the truth of the conclusion, or maybe this would help you. If an argument is logically valid, it's impossible for the premises to be true and the conclusion to be false at the same time. So if we assume all men are mortal and we assume Socrates is a man, it would be impossible for Socrates not to be mortal. That is, if 1 is true and 2 is true, that would guarantee the truth of 3. So example argument number 1 is logically valid. This might be easier to see with some additional examples. So let's look at another example. We'll call this example argument number 2. Premise 1. All fish are mammals. Premise 2. Nemo is a fish. And therefore, conclusion 3, Nemo is a mammal. Now, this is to test whether or not you've understood the definition of logical validity. Is example argument number 2 logically valid? Well, yes it is. It certainly is logically valid. Assuming the truth of premises 1 and 2 would guarantee the truth of the conclusion 3. The conclusion 3 can be inferred from premises 1 and 2 with certainty. It's impossible for 1 to be true, 2 to be true, and 3 to be false at the same time. And that's what it means for an argument to be logically valid. So if I assume that all fish are mammals, and I assume that Nemo is a fish, then I can conclude from that, I can infer from that with certainty that Nemo is a mammal. The conclusion does follow from the premises logically. And so this is logically valid. I'm sure some of you are at home watching this, jumping out of your chairs to protest that this cannot possibly be a valid argument because everybody knows fish are not mammals. Mammals give birth to live young. Mammals have hair. Mammals are warm-blooded. They have, they lactate. They have is it, a four-chambered heart or something? Right. So, but anyway, they certainly don't have gills. They certainly don't lay eggs, and they certainly can't lactate. And fish can't do any of those things. So fish aren't mammals. Okay. And so premise one is false. And so this can't be a valid argument. If that is your complaint, then you're right in one sense and wrong in another. You are right in the sense that premise one is false, and this is therefore a bad argument. But you're wrong in your understanding of the concept of logical validity. Because the concept of logical validity is strictly about the structure of the argument. It's saying that the argument is structured in such a way that if the premises were true, the conclusion would have to be. It's not saying that the premises are true, just saying that the conclusion does follow from them. And notice that the structure of this argument is the same as the structure of example argument number one. All S are P, R is S, and therefore R is P. So, all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, and therefore Socrates is mortal. All fish are mammals, Nemo is a fish, therefore Nemo is a mammal. Both arguments follow this same logical structure, and that is a valid structure. Now, I guess part of the confusion here is in the social sciences, they talk about, the experimental validity or the validity of an experiment or something, and that means something different than what it does in logic. I don't know what that means. Ask a social scientist. But in logic, I can tell you, logical validity means that the argument is structured in such a way that the conclusion can be inferred from the premises with certainty, that assuming the truth of the premises guarantees the truth of the conclusion, and both example argument number one and example argument number two are logically valid. However, as I noted, this is a bad argument, not because it's illogical, but because the first premise is false. So this rests on a false premise. And so the way we would describe an argument like this is we would say that it's logically valid, but unsound. And so this is the next key idea from our crash course in logic, the idea of logical soundness. So what it means for an argument to be logically sound is that it is logically valid and has true premises. So a sound argument is one that in which the conclusion can be inferred from the premises with certainty and the premises are true. And so example argument number one was sound. The premises were true, the conclusion followed from them. Example argument number two is unsound because although the conclusion does follow from the premises are not true. So example argument number one is sound. Example argument number two is valid, but unsound. I have a third example that will hopefully clarify the distinction between logical validity and logical soundness. We'll call this example argument number three. First premise, Canada is north of Texas. Now, I'm no expert in geography, but I believe that's correct. Premise two, the Pope is Catholic. I'm no expert in religious studies either, but I believe that's true. And therefore, conclusion 3. Yeah. Donald Trump is the 47th President of the United States. I'm no expert in political science either, but I believe that one is also true. So, here's the question. Is example argument number 3 logically sound? Hopefully this one's easier than the last one. Hopefully everybody said, no, obviously not, Mr. G. But I want you to think this through. What's so bad about this argument? I mean, surely it consists entirely of true claims. It doesn't make any false claims, right? It is true that Canada is north of Texas. It is true that the Pope is Catholic. And like it or not, for better or for worse, it is the fact that Donald Trump is, or soon will be, the 47th President of the United States. So, the argument makes no false claims. So how could it be a bad argument? I'm sure you're saying, well, look, Mr. G, it's not that the argument makes false claims, it's that it doesn't hang together properly. The conclusion can't be inferred from the premises. The conclusion has no relationship to the premises, and the premises don't have any relationship to each other. They don't have any logical connection. I mean, it's all true claims, but it's completely illogical. And you're right. Example argument number 3 is invalid. It's logically invalid. The conclusion cannot be inferred from the premises. The premises don't tell us anything about the conclusion because they're not logically connected. That is, this argument doesn't have the correct logical structure. So notice the idea of logical validity is about the logical structure of the argument, which is a different point than whether or not the claims made in the argument are true or false. All right, so quick review. Logic is the study of the principles used in reasoning. The object of study in logic is the argument, and here an argument is just a chain of reasoning designed to establish some conclusion. The building blocks of arguments are propositions, which are claims that are either true or false. The claims that are meant to prove the conclusion are called premises. The claim that the argument is meant to prove is called the conclusion. An argument in which the conclusion follows from the premises necessarily is logically valid, and an argument that's logically valid and has true premises is logically sound. So example argument number 1, all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, and therefore Socrates is mortal, is logically sound. The conclusion follows from the premises, and the premises are true. Example argument number 2, that all fish are mammals, Nemo is a fish, and therefore Nemo is a mammal, is logically valid because the conclusion follows from the premises, but unsound because it makes a false claim in the premises. It has a false premise. And example argument number 3 is also unsound, but for a different reason, not because it makes false claims, but because it is not logically valid. That's about all I want to do for logic, at least today. The key thing to take away here is that there are really 2 ways that a philosophical argument can go wrong. It could either make false claims, which is what went wrong in example argument number 2, or be illogical, which is what went wrong in example argument number 3. A good philosophical argument makes true claims and is logical. So, in a way, to summarize this, kind of tell you how we would put this to use. When you are analyzing a philosophical argument, you can think of it as a series of steps. So the first step to analyzing a philosophical argument would be to ask, what is the argument meant to prove? That will be the conclusion of your argument. Second, what reasons are being given in support of the conclusion? So what reasons are being given as proof? Those will be the premises of your argument. Third, does the conclusion follow from the premises logically? That is your argument valid? And last, are the premises actually true? So 3 and 4 together are asking, is it sound? So that's it. The statement the argument is meant to prove true is called the conclusion. The reasons given are called the premises. If the conclusion follows from the premises, the argument is logically valid, and if the premises are true in a logically valid argument, then the argument is sound. Now, I want to pause the video here, and we're going to apply these tools to some arguments for moral skepticism, which will be the topic of the next video.